Okay, I can see that you're in a very good mood. That's very good, because we still have the morning in front of us. For those of you who didn't notice on the agenda, we are finishing by lunchtime, so we still have the morning session. I hope you all left your rooms, because you were supposed to live. I mean, you left the rooms with all your stuff. So you left it for the cleaning stuff to clean. And I also hope that you managed to order your minibus for if you're flying today, because you had to do it yesterday. Otherwise, you may not take it today. But there is still other possibilities of transportation. We also, you know, that yesterday there was a group of participants who were sitting by the TV corner thinking about what we can do in relation to the refugees and what kind of action we can take. And there is an idea. An idea will be executed today at 11. So the idea is to make a very short solidarity movie, really short, where we would like to ask you to say just one sentence in your own language. So if you are interested and willing to join and say the sentence in your own language, we invite you at 11 o'clock in coffee break to room B. There will be camera there, and it will be very quick. So it will take you half a second to say the sentence. Room B at 11 o'clock. Okay, I think we can start. We have, in the morning, we have two addresses, actually. There is one from Martina, who will try to express her impressions and to share with us her impressions about what actually happened during our symposium. And then we have Nuala Connolly as well with us, who is going to address us with her input. We'll tell you a little bit more later about it. And after the coffee break, we are going to split again into 4 groups. There's not going to be labs. There's going to be, let's say, working groups. So we will work for 1 hour and go a little bit deeper into thinking on what we can take from the experience that we got yesterday and also experience that we brought here, and translate it a little bit into youth policy, youth work, and also research kind of key messages. That's how we call it. We didn't want to call it recommendations, because they don't necessarily have to be recommendations, but rather messages we want to address. And then we have the closing session and bye-bye with a lunch. So there is still lunch provided here in the building for you. Okay. Any questions? Concerns? No, good. I have a feeling we are like very limited in number. I think that people are still maybe leaving their rooms and packing their stuff. So hopefully by within a few seconds, minutes, we are going to be all here. Martina, are you willing to share with us your impressions?
Good morning. Dear Diary, oh, what on earth was I thinking when I applied to be the General Rapporteur of the Youth Participation in a Digitalized World Symposium? And what on earth was I thinking when I said yes when Hanyo asked, Martina, do you mind giving a short reflection about your feedback from in the plenary regarding the first 1.5 days? Thank you, Hanyo. I had a great Tuesday evening trying to sort out all these 16 lab-generated content that you actually provided to me. Dear Diary, I have to confess that at least Monday was not such a demanding day for me. The 2 keynote speakers that were here, they actually introduced us to the subject. We heard Roman Gerodimos talking about online youth civic attitudes. I also heard that youth people can and want to express their voice, but there are some terms and conditions that apply when they face something that is civically interesting. He talked about that it has to be relevant to life world, to me, my family, my community, to transmit efficacy and hope, to have a tangible outcome, and be related to empowerment, to be emotionally engaging, affective, to have some affective and symbolic aspects, to be visually elegant, beautiful, or gripping. We also heard Julia Kloiber from the Open Knowledge Foundation from Germany, that she shared with us experiences of how can digital tools transform young people from data consumers to also producers of content, and how creating a tool and sharing data you're actually empowering other people to use this information and to take action. And she also underlined that we need to know how the systems around us function, because open data can not only give important input, but they can also build trust. And it's important, underline, that to mix offline and online tools. And you know what, dear diary, they both agreed. Digital tools cannot fix politics. Dear diary, also high-level people attended this event. Snetana Samardzis Markovic, the Director General of Democracy of the Council of Europe, Tibor Navracis, the Commissioner for Education, Culture and Youth and Sport in the European Commission, and Laszlo Szabo, the Parliamentary State Secretary and Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Hungary. And they all have committed in doing their best to engage all young people, provide tools and frameworks and guidelines and policies for multiplying the good effects of the digital era and giving access to more and more people to actively participate through such channels. And they all are expecting the results of this symposium so that they can feed in their work plans, in their policy work, and in their activities. What a big responsibility for the 110 participants that are gathered here. Dear diary, here are also some things that I found out in these last 1.5 days. If there was a ladder of youth participation in democratic life before the digital era, then now it has even more steps, and it's even much higher, since the notion of participation nowadays requires a conceptual stretching. But actually, as Roman said, are there really boundaries between online and offline? Now that we live in a third self and body technology, can we still talk about a separate digitalized world? However, digital world, let's say, presents an unprecedented number of opportunities, and it was also mentioned yesterday that it should at least be accessible and affordable to ensure participation, especially of young people. But also the digital world makes societies even more vulnerable to risk. There are big discussions around personal data protection, bullying, harassment, hate speech, manipulation, or extremism. What we also observe is a decrease in institutional forms of participation, and in the same time an increase in unconventional forms of participation among young people. As Geoffrey Players also said, young people participate a lot, but in non-conventional ways. However, also some people mentioned that signing an online petition is still the most common form of a political participation in most countries. And then Ludvinek, I don't remember the first name, he also mentioned that when we look at political participation, there are dramatic differences among young people depending on the country, in the European country in which they are. Then Daniel Poli also said that participation must have a direct effect and impact on decision-making processes. And then we heard so many words about open data, open source, knowledge societies, and are we actually really familiar with all these concepts? Again, we enter in the discussion about the digital divide. Are we all equipped in understanding and participating in this digital world? We can't deny that the digital divide while discussing about youth e-participation, said Anna Loderto. And talking about solutions and challenges, Manfred also mentioned at some point that blended learning will become more and more important in both formal and non-formal environments. And then Yelena Miljanit also said that face-to-face interaction is crucial for succeeding in youth participation at all levels. We also heard that we learn to name our emotions through emicons, but there are still limits on the web to learn really about intercultural competencies. We also heard that digital journalism actually offers new opportunities and more opportunities than challenges for youth participation. It's an inexpensive, accessible, resourceful way of action, and has many distribution channels, giving this way to young people a lot of room for participation. We also heard about different participatory online tools that give the opportunity to citizens to actually comment, have an idea, or make a suggestion to their governments about issues that affect them. But then also the question was raised, but they only work when governments are actually responsive. What happens when they're not? So open youth participation is part of a governance in the 21st century. However, this requires a coherence between values and actions, and something like that would be very much appreciated. Antonio Carlos Ruiz Soria also mentioned about the opportunities that the digital and creative economy is also offering to all of us, talking about how it can boost the economy, how it can create new job places, how it can ensure more fast and easy communication and access to data and information. However, there are some challenges there related to inequality, pressure, lack of funding, isolation, high competition, fast and changing environment. All those things, all those discussions that we had here, they definitely lead us to say or to feel that we are at least heading towards a better understanding of participation through good practices that we shared, through policy developments, through researches that we are receiving, that are happening actually. Everybody underlined the need of learning to participate in the digital era. They talked about the role of civic education in this direction and underlined that this requires a constant dialogue between young people and educators. We even tackled the issue of how we want the university of the 21st century. So people said that they want a mixture of traditional and modern technologies there. They want it to be mobile, attractive for students, innovative and creative, interactive in real life, allowing people to learn by doing, be engaging, democratic, transparent. At the same time, there are the recommendations that are being developed, strategies that are trying to amplify the participation of young people in Europe. But actually, to talk about genuine youth participation, we still need to build communities both online and offline. And as Jochen Bosnik said, we are taking a journey through a complex field, and we might not have the answers, but at least we are able to identify the questions. And we need to still deliberate and experiment on all those new forms. Dear Diary, you will be surprised by what young people, and maybe not so young people, are doing to enable healthy youth participation in a digitalized world. While video game communities are expanding, there are organizations like Game Over Hate that tackle hate in online gaming environments and try to foster inclusive gaming opportunities. Campaigns like the No Hate Speech campaign have engaged young people in different European countries, but we heard here experiences coming from Hungary and from Ireland. Local governments are using new technologies to offer more efficient tools in supporting the dynamic and complex individual transitions of young people in their transition between and within education and training and work, like the example we got from the province of Siena in Italy with the Job Tribu project. There are democratic services developed by different institutions like the Nuortideat in Finland, that is allowing actually young people to make suggestions, participate in, and influence matters that affect them. Even European institutions and other agencies such as Eurofund reflect on the impact of new technologies on young people. And Eurofund is actually even about to launch a survey on the social situation of young people, tackling also the issue of digital environments. And then also universities all across Europe are more and more researching the subject, such as the University of Tallinn that is doing a research on social media and youth participation. And then other universities are suggested by Political Externa that they are experimenting and exploring the opportunities of e-education, which is all about power sharing, opportunity to give feedback from students to teachers, and more youth participation. There are also youth-based organizations that are trying to redefine their participatory structures, like, see, for example, the Liquid Democracy example. And then other organizations like I Feel that are working in the field of intercultural learning and dialogue, and they are also exploring what are the opportunities there through new technologies. Salto Resource Searcher and Participation, they're rethinking and doing actions towards facing those challenges in youth participation. Then we also heard about how from sandwich protests we come to implement the European label for quality internships and the initiative that the Interns Go Pro did to promote transparency in internships. We also heard about the youth project, which is underway, presented by Liquid Democracy, again, that will provide tools and tips for mobile and digital youth participation in and across Europe. And as they said, right now, youth workers might not be so experienced yet with e-youth participation, and they certainly will be helped by receiving some certain guidelines. And then also the Youth Part project that was presented by Jugend für Europa and IHAB, Germany, that tackles participation of young people in the democratic Europe, aiming to an end-to-end involvement of young people. Or then Youth Employment Services and the Transit platform that was promoted by the UN agencies in Montenegro, and that actually shows that young people are more interested in, as was said in the lab, that young people are interested in concrete actions and ideas compared to discussions. Or civil society apps in Ukraine that present ways of voting from mobile phones. And as the presenter said, the day after tomorrow will come, and we need to be prepared. So Dear Diary, while in Budapest, I also felt part of a historical moment of youth participation, because we were celebrating the 20 years of the European Youth Center in Budapest, and if only these walls could speak, they would definitely reveal a lot of non-virtual life stories of young people, and not so young people anymore, who benefited a lot from this space. So happy birthday from me again, European Youth Center. And you're still a place where inspiring ideas come together. And then, so in the course of these days, and we're following recent developments regarding the refugee crisis, so being here, all of us together, it actually gives the opportunity to young people to actually do something. And then I heard that there's going to be the Solidarity movie in the next few hours. Dear Diary. I'm afraid that if participants realize that I'm so old-fashioned as to keep a diary where I actually write words on paper, I think they will laugh at me. Why don't you use Storyfy? Why don't you create a blog? Why do you need a diary if you have social media to remind you of everything that happened? And I question myself, like, if I'm born at the end of 79, I still don't belong to the Generation Y, right? So I don't need to justify my non-being digitally native all the time, right? And Dear Diary, you know that I also realize that I might be representing the only generation that is both analog native and digital native. And what a big blessing this is to us, to be able, that gives us the tools to be able to understand what indeed are the opportunities and the challenges of the world that is currently emerging. Dear Diary, one more thing I luckily found out through this symposium is that new technologies are a blessing for a general rapporteur. Actually, others are doing the job for you. So for this, I'm thankful to all the participants that were posting on Twitter. They don't know how many quotes I will copy-paste. All the rapporteurs that use Ethernet and were lively reporting on the workshops they were attending. Luckily, somebody in the partnership thought that I cannot attend 4 labs in the same time. Then thank Andrea as well for posting all the links to the Ethernet for me on Facebook to follow the discussions, and running around the PCs to gather the material for me. I could have stayed in my room all day, or even walk around Budapest, actually, but I had to make sure that I follow Davide from the partnership so that he sees that I'm doing my job, so I was following him in his workshop. And then I would also like to thank Commissioner Tibor Navracsics for posting on Twitter the following: how can young people use digital tools to find their place in society? Read my speech at, and he was actually providing the link to his speech. So this gives me hope that he will actually manage to engage with at least 1 million youth during his term. Dear Diary, after this experience with the technological tools that were available to us, next time I will propose to the Youth Partnership if I can be their first general rapporteur. But I don't think they would really like the idea, because so many people these days actually said that online interaction cannot replace real-life contact. And I guess they will read this in the final report as well. And honestly, it's actually quite true. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina, for sharing your diary with us. Not everybody is willing to share the diaries with, even with the parents, and you shared it with us. I had the feeling when listening to you that I went again through all the program within this 15 minutes, actually, and not even thinking that we have been working really the whole day yesterday, and people were tired. And so thanks a lot again. Would you like to, do you have I think there's no questions actually, but maybe you would like to make comments, or you have some reflections, or you would like to share your diary with us as well. People say no. Well, if there is no comments, then we can go to the next part of the program.
Thank you, Derek. So I am very happy to introduce Nuala Connolly from the National University of Ireland. She is going to take us through a short journey towards digital literacy for the active participation and engagement of young people in a digitalized world. So, Nuala?
Okay, and I just want to start by saying thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here at the symposium. I'm really interested to speak on a topic that I've been doing research on for a long time, and that's notably the information society, and more recently young people, and young people's interaction with the information.
Come closer to the microphone.
Sorry. Young people's interaction with the information society. I suppose I have a short reflection for you, which is that it's been really beneficial for me to be able to hear your reflections on the overall symposium, because unfortunately I haven't had the opportunity to join the symposium until today, so it's been really helpful for me to get a sense of what's gone before, and actually where there's a little bit of overlap in what I'm about to say, which is inevitable. So the theme of the conference is about participation in a digital world, and I think what I want to talk about is digital literacy. So essentially the suite of skills that really contribute to participation in the digital world. And these are a suite of skills, I guess, that affect all people in all contexts, not just young people, but I'm going to emphasize the importance of digital skills for young people today. Okay. So I'm going to sort of address a few questions that I think will benefit the inputs of the symposium. So I'm going to look at what is digital literacy, what does it look like? We hear the term a lot, and we hear it in relation to, some people refer to a second level digital divide and having the digital skills to participate in a meaningful way. I suppose just to think about the definitions of what that actually means. I also want to address what we know about young people's digital literacy. I'm going to use Ireland as an example, but also in Europe in general. There have been a lot of really useful recent large-scale studies across Europe that tell us a little bit about young people's experiences and young people's levels of digital literacy in a digital world. So also what do we know about young people's experiences of opportunities and risks in the digital world? And I know this is something that Anna from Eurofound possibly addressed a bit. And that's something I want to look at too. I also want to look at the role of our education system, formal, but also I think informal and non-formal, to support young people to participate in a digital world in a meaningful way. And I suppose think about also what new opportunities our education system can provide. I think digital literacy has become a policy imperative, but it isn't always reflected in the curricula, or maybe not yet, and it's something that's developing. So what is digital literacy? So we hear the term a lot, and we hear it in the context of digital participation and having this suite of skills. It's considered to be a range of skills, knowledge and understanding that young people need in order to participate fully and fairly in an increasingly digital landscape. So digital literacy extends beyond the consumption of digital media, but right through to the creation of content. So it's about being able to navigate the digital landscape right through from being able to source information, being able to access information, source it, evaluate it, and use it in a meaningful way, and also to be able to create content and to participate in that meaningful sense. And then digital participation, I'm sure it's a term that the definition of which has been debated throughout the symposium, but just to reflect on that a little as well. So I suppose to be a digital participant is about making informed use of digital technology and media in one's own life. And I think, again, as I mentioned, that extends beyond sort of passive participation, but the informed part is important. So informed use sort of implies that you have a set of skills that will allow you to participate in a meaningful way. There are various different models of what information and digital literacy look like. I'm not going to talk through them all, but I'll show you two that I think are particularly helpful. This one is a UK model by the Joint Information Systems Committee, and it sort of highlights the different suite of skills that are considered to be important parts of digital literacy. And you can see it's right the way through from information literacy, which is about interpreting, evaluating, managing and sharing information, right through to ICT literacy, so to be able to adopt and use digital technologies. And also learning skills, so that part as well where it's important to have the learning skills in different environments. And also then you'll see communication and collaboration, which is important. So it's that active participation and that interactive participation piece which is important. Another model which I think is quite helpful is by Beetham and Sharpe, which sees digital literacy more as a developmental process. And it ranges from at the bottom of the pyramid, the access and awareness that is sometimes associated with the digital divide, so having access to infrastructure. But then beyond that, there's a sort of a more nuanced understanding. There's a more nuanced understanding towards functional skills to higher level capabilities and identity. So the idea that at the bottom it's the I have access to technology, and we know that increasingly across Europe people have access to different technologies, and that varies from country to country. But beyond that then we have the I can, I do and I am. So it's being able to participate in a more meaningful way. What am I able to do? What am I actually doing? And then that more interactive process of creating an identity online and participating. I'm not going to go through these, just to give you an indication that actually this is a policy imperative. It's not something new. We are aware of it. It's been reflected in various different policies, even a European Commission recent framework for developing digital competencies. And not all of these relate directly to young people, but it's generally understood that digital literacy is significantly reflected in the policy agenda and in Ireland too. And there are various different national strategies as part of the digital agenda. So I want to start by taking a look at the bottom part of the pyramid, so the access and awareness, and just mention briefly what that looks like for young people in Europe. And as I said, this is often associated with the digital divide, or what we'll call here, I suppose, the first level of the digital divide. So we know that increasingly people have access to the internet across Europe, and this has increased significantly from 2007 to 2014. We know that broadband access is increasing across Europe too. That's not news. We also know that there's been significant investment in ICT infrastructure in schools, so that there are more computers in schools for young people. We also know that there's more likely to be broadband access in schools for young people. What do we know about how young people are accessing and participating? So we know smartphones are actually the devices that children and young people are most likely to own or use to go online. And we also know that the age of first internet use is dropping, and that the age of access to first personal devices is also dropping. So younger and younger children and young people are having access to internet and technologies. We know actually that the majority of their use still takes place in the home environment. So it's not in the school environment where they're the opportunity to learn different types of digital skills. And just to show you some of the different activities, and this is taken from the Net Children Go mobile study, which was a large-scale study of young people and children's experiences of technology. And it was moving from that sort of post-desktop media ecology into looking at different types of devices, and mobile devices specifically. But it's looking at the difference of internet use in school and home. And here's a sample of some of the countries. And you can see that the top bar is school and the bottom bar is home access. You can see that for the majority of countries, and not all actually, Denmark sort of sits out as an example, and there are a few other countries, and some of the Nordic countries in particular, that are set apart in that respect. But if you look at Ireland in particular, you see that the majority of young people are undertaking most of their activities online at home and not in school. What's interesting too, I think, if you look at the types of activities, to the right-hand side there, you can see in the column, the ones listed near the top are the most popular and then descending. So you can see that the types of activities that young people are engaged in are largely lifestyle type activities, which might be, some of them are considered, I suppose, passive consumption type activities. And as you move further down, you see use the internet for schoolwork, or more nuanced work type activities are less likely to be undertaken. So I suppose, having looked at that, I think it's important to question too the persistent idea that young people are automatically internet savvy, and that since they were born into the digital era, that they're somehow digital natives. And we hear this term digital natives a lot, and it was, I think, Prensky was the original author and originally coined the term, and even he has come to note since that digital wisdom forms part of what's important for digital natives. So in fact there's a separation of the two. So digital natives aren't always don't always necessarily have the types of skills that we might assume they have, and I think this can perpetuate then a perception held by policymakers right the way through to parents and teachers that eventually results in essential skills maybe being omitted from the curriculum. We assume we're looking at as digital natives. But in reality, a lot of the research shows otherwise. So young people are conscious and concerned about privacy, but at the same time this doesn't always translate into knowledge. Research also identifies a disparity between their information behaviour online and their understanding of the risks associated with what they're doing. So essentially young people tend to overestimate their skills and their skills to protect their personal information and to be mindful of their privacy online. So yeah, just to talk a little bit more on that. So young people tend to overestimate their skills. They're not aware of gaps in their skills. They're spending more time in what we talk about, these lifestyle skills, and not in fact workplace skills. And also they don't have access to digital literacy education in a formal, structured way. And I think this is improving, but it's becoming increasingly important. And you might have recently, in the last couple of days, seen an OECD report published that said that actually the increased access to ICT in schools was resulting, especially where there was frequent use, was resulting in poorer outcomes, educational outcomes for children and young people. I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that, and I think the question is one of digital wisdom and skills and the curriculum development around that, and making sure that what's happening, and I know you mentioned blended learning, and the types of skills that young people are acquiring in schools are changing to incorporate digital literacy. So despite the fact that they're overestimating their skills, they're not aware of gaps in their skills, we know that young people have encountered things online they wish they haven't seen. Really interestingly, from the Net Children Go mobile survey, was that 43% of young people were unable to report abuse or harmful content. So one of the main mechanisms that a lot of the social media technologies use to, I suppose, support people's participation around reporting mechanisms for harmful content was something that young people weren't actually able to navigate or negotiate, and that I think is quite interesting. So having a look at young people's levels of digital literacy, well, they're rising slowly. And you can see again here some examples. This is from the EU Kids Online survey, which is another large-scale survey undertaken quite recently. And you can see the types of activities from 2010 to 2014 that young people are able to do. And you can see some of these would tie in with what we talk about when we talk about digital literacy. So compare different websites to decide if information is true. There's some level of improvement in skills, but still relatively low, I think, and still opportunity for learning. Also, a point I think I wanted to make was that skills are unevenly distributed, and this is something we know, and this is something that is often referred to now as the second level divide. So beyond the first level divide, where we need to look at access and infrastructure, we then reach a second level divide where skills remain unevenly distributed. And some of this is directly a result of the first level divide too. So when you don't have that access and when it's not there at an early age, that has a knock-on effect. So we know that older teenagers and those from higher socioeconomic backgrounds have greater access to the internet. We know that middle-class teenagers using the internet more frequently and for longer on an average day. And we know that boys may not necessarily differ from girls in the amount of use. And what's interesting also from that was that, and this sort of reflects back on the access piece, was that 23% of disadvantaged students who had started using computers by the age of 6 or before, but it was 43% for advantaged students. So it goes right back to that sort of early piece around access and use that then contributes to this second level digital divide. What's a point I think that can't be ignored is that the greater that young people's online skills and self-efficacy, the more rather than the fewer risks they encounter online. So we can't deny the fact that once we increase and improve digital skills and digital literacy, this will have a knock-on effect. Obviously, more opportunities online will lead to the children and young people encountering more risk in online environments. But I think developing a suite of digital literacy skills among children and young people will help them to make choices and to be better placed to navigate this type of content and this type of experience. And this is just a chart that gives you an indication of the more use, more risk analogy. And you can just see, if you see across the bottom, it's the use of the internet daily, and it increases towards from left to right. And then on the left, you see experienced one or more risk factors. And you can see that Estonia and some of the Nordic countries who are online more frequently actually experience more risk. And the opposite is true for Turkey and other countries. So it's sort of an interesting point to make as well, and it's worth noting. And I know it's something that was reflected on a bit throughout the symposium. So what can we do to support literacy skills? What's the next step? Well, we know the policy, it's there as a policy imperative. We know, we see it in the digital agenda, we see it in various capacities and in different national contexts too. But I think there's certainly a case to be made for advocacy and public awareness of this as an issue. There's a growing policy demand for teachers, education providers in the industry and other organisations to expand digital literacy programmes. And there's different ways this can be done. And we've seen examples where it may be targeted for specific groups, maybe for disadvantaged groups. You see sometimes examples even for older people, for different voluntary organisations offering skills programmes. But also there's the universal piece. And I think the universal piece is something that can happen in schools. So in addition to interventions designed to equalise access, interventions targeted, that's what I've mentioned, at increasing specific skills will enhance the take-up of online opportunities. So it's this emphasis on this second level divide, so emphasising the importance of digital skills. And I think there are opportunities there through formal, but also through informal and non-formal learning environments. I think the research shows actually, which is interesting, is that key is the role of other people. So intermediaries are quite important, and this could be the teacher in the school environment. It may be the youth worker, and that's something we could think about, what role the youth worker could potentially play in this context. But it's the importance of other people in facilitating the development of these types of digital skills. In Ireland, the Library Association of Ireland, and often it's library organisations that get involved in this type of digital literacy advocacy, have a task force on information literacy, and they're attempting to build a national framework. And this includes, and some of this was mentioned, embedding e-learning across the curricula, and an emphasis on e-learning, but also within e-learning, the importance of recognising the importance of digital skills. And this is digital literacy in primary and post-primary education. And it's the use of digital technologies, and this is something that's come up to not just passively consume and engage in the lifestyle activities, but in a more meaningful way to communicate, create, collaborate and manage student learning. So the plan is to develop a national digital and information literacy framework in Ireland, and I know there's examples of this in other countries. There's one in Scotland and I think one in Wales too. I want to show you a couple of things that are happening in Ireland. I think we could do a lot more, but there are some initiatives happening around digital literacy. One is a junior cycle short course, so at second level there's a digital literacy short course happening. I think this should be an important part actually of the curriculum in general. But it's there and it's been really well received by students. It's only something like a 10-week programme on digital literacy and digital skills. But it's something that's happening at the moment. They're currently identifying a digital champions initiative. I think this is probably quite a good example of something that can be done, and it can be this intermediary. You can have a digital champion as this intermediary who will be best placed to support the provision of these skills. And then also a range of workshops for teachers. And I think this is an important point as well, that teachers don't often feel best placed to support this type of learning. So I think there's a piece around capacity building within the education sector around teachers and any other professionals who want to get involved in this type of teaching and learning. And I think that should also be a policy imperative. CoderDojo, yeah, just briefly now, I just wanted to mention this one. And coding, again, and programming is something that's just, again, not in the curriculum, and it's certainly not in the Irish curriculum. But despite this, research in Ireland that was conducted shows that programming is now considered by people in Ireland to be just as important as learning mainstream subjects taught in school. And yet it's not there. So of 1,000 adults, 2/3 said that coding would be important, just as important as maths, science and languages, just to best equip the young people for the types of skills that they might need, not just to digitally participate, but to be ready for the evolving jobs market. 1/3 in Ireland actually believe it's more valuable than learning the Irish language, which we were obliged to learn up to the age of 18 to get into university. So that was an interesting point. With 1/5 believing it's a more important skill than maths. So even though the two are quite related, but interesting. So although it's not taught in Irish schools, it is delivered voluntarily with the CoderDojo project, and this was set up by a Cork teenager who managed to get an angel investor on board, and it's, I think, within 3 years, there were 360 worldwide CoderDojo programs running. So that was just an example of that I thought was helpful. So the next steps, just to conclude. So I think some of the points that I've made, just to reiterate them, literacy is fundamental to children's capacity to use digital media. We still oftentimes see an emphasis on the first level infrastructural digital divide, and we talk about digital natives then as sort of assuming that they have the types of skills. And I think there's a bit of an industry message there too. There's certainly a sense in the industry that there's an assumed level of understanding around how young people, children and young people navigate the internet. We know that enhanced knowledge is a strong predictor of promotive privacy behaviours, so we know young people cope better with the types of challenges they face online and are better able to manage their identity, which is part of the suite of skills of digital literacy, once they have improved knowledge. I think infrastructure-related policies should be supported by capacity building, so it's not just about the bottom part of the pyramid, the access piece. It's moving up through that towards the second level divide and advocating for and supporting and promoting digital literacy and bridging that second level divide. And I think also we need to be conscious and mindful that this is different for different people in different contexts and therefore would need to be handled differently. And that's always important, I think, in upskilling. And then I think finally, just to conclude, young people who are digitally literate will be able to think carefully about what they are participating in and how the terms of their participation may be constrained or limited by a range of factors. They will be able to exercise choice in how they participate. So young people who have this suite of skills will be well placed to exercise choice in how they participate in a digital world in a meaningful way. And just to close, I wanted just to show you a recent example of young people in Ireland harnessing technology to participate digitally. And this was around the marriage equality bill that was passed in Ireland, and there was huge momentum on social media and with young people using and start generating these different hashtags. You see the one at the bottom, register to vote, built a lot of momentum and actually contributed to 66,000 registered to the supplementary electoral register. Many of them were younger and first-time voters. And I wouldn't say there's necessarily complete correlation between the two, but I'd say it definitely had an impact. The home to vote hashtag, so a lot of people who travel back to Ireland specifically to vote in the referendum use this hashtag to build solidarity and share their experience with one another and build a sense of community while they're in this level of civic participation. And then make GRA the law. GRA is the Irish for love. Again, took off and was really popular on the day and around the referendum itself. So I just wanted to close with that as an example of a positive example. I know we talk about harm and risk a lot, but just a positive example of young people's participation in a digital world. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuala. Would you have any questions? Okay. So you first, and then Daniel, and then Manfred. And then here. Yeah. The lady with the scarf.
Actually, it's not a question, it's a comment. Thank you for your presentation. That's the first thing I would like to say. And that I was very happy to hear that the young people in digital world are the same as the in real world. So they overestimate their skill, they underestimate the risk. It's great, so they are as they are, and this is wonderful. At the same time, I think what you said in this last sentence there, that this belief that this increasing the digital literacy would bring them to have to be more careful. I mean, this is a nice, optimistic idea. We read on the cigarette package that smoking is dangerous, and young people are smoking like crazy because that's what they're supposed to do. This is their age, and they are absolutely allowed to take this risk. And I think it's about awareness. So I'm aware that I smoke, and that's not good, but I still do this. So it's about doing the same risky thing, but being aware that this is risk. That's the only thing we can gain, I think, in this whole thing. Yes. I mean, maybe it's a question if you agree with this or not, or maybe you can elaborate on this, but. This is a triangle with questions.
I also want to thank you for your presentation. One question is, what are the risks? Because you just were talking about it, and you showed us the picture. The more you're online, the more risks there are. Of course, yes. When you spend more time, or you live longer, you have more risk. So I just want to know what are the real risks here. And the other comment I want to make is you were talking about passive and active consuming of digital media, and I'm asking myself, is it really true? Because these lifestyle activities like music and videos, which are really the first first activity young people do, they're not only passive. I think it's normal for young people, if they watch a YouTube video, they comment it, they share it with others, the same with music. And they write articles on their blog about it. So this is not only passive consuming. And I would ask you if you agree with this. And in the next step, maybe you have to change the questionnaires when you ask young people. Because of course, if you ask what do you do on the internet, they say, okay, I watch videos. But for them, it's also included that they are actively discussing these videos. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I just want to add, because it's connected to that, I also join the thanks for this really very enlightening presentation. But for me, it's also about who is defining the risks. It's not just to know which risks there are highlighted that exist, but it's also, is it again the adults that know everything what is risky, or is it the young people? And it's also again about the skills. So when we are defining literacy, I guess we should more and more involve and open up this participatory culture also for defining training needs and which skills are needed for the young people, because they are the experienced ones, even so they are unskilled, but they know what they don't know.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, in terms of the types of risks, I suppose, that young people are experiencing online, I think there's probably two. There's the first one would be like the harmful content, so encountering harmful content in whatever form they describe that to be. I think the second one is around more participation, increased what we term, I suppose, cyberbullying. We hear a lot of, and the dangers, I suppose, associated with other children and young people engaged in communities where there's a lot of anonymity is preserved, and therefore they've negative experiences in those contexts. I think the research shows that there's been an increase, and there was an Irish study conducted recently as well, and there was an increase. And I see cyberbullying as just a new form of traditional bullying, and I don't necessarily set it apart, but there's been an increase in young people's experience of that, and that's something they identify themselves, actually, to answer that, Manfred, as harmful content, or as a harmful experience, or as a risk online. So those would be the main two in relation to that. And I think you make a good point there in around who is defining these different types of risks. And I think that's that's something that needs to be addressed, and it is identified in the literature that there's an absolute need to explore what these risks are. And a lot of the recent studies have come to the conclusion that we actually really do need a large-scale European study of what the risks young people are encountering and experiencing online are. And I think how that survey or how that instrument might be designed is something that might need input from children and young people. But it's interesting, and it may be something that's more open-ended, but it is identified as a gap. That we talk about it a lot. We decide we decide, I suppose, as researchers and as adults, what these risks and what this type of harmful content is, be it pornography or be whatever else. But in reality, I think there is definitely a gap in the literature around what young people perceive these different harmful experiences to be, and what young people perceive as not just as harmful content, but also as cyberbullying and as harmful experiences online too, if that answers your question. And yes, in terms of the other question, yeah, I mean, I agree. And again, I think it's something that falls into us needing to do more research. It's the passive active consumption piece. I agree that when people are watching videos, they're liking them, they're commenting on them, so there is a piece of engagement there too. But I suppose it's just, it's making the distinction between the level of skill needed to do something like that versus the level of skill needed to do a bit more nuanced content creation at a higher level, and being able to maybe learn types of skills that would help with other communication skills and things like that too. So I would just identify a slight point of difference there in the level of skill required, but I agree that there's no distinct, necessarily no distinct sort of just passive consumption of media. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, next question.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. Really interesting and useful overview as well of the digital literacy debates. I just want to focus a little bit on what you said about coding. And this is definitely not a criticism against you. It's more like a question that has been troubling me a little bit. Mm-hmm. I'm not opposed at all to opening up things like coding and data mining. There are lots of debates about how we should allow people to give them the opportunities to train themselves. I guess the question is, why do we want to do this? If you said something about people say, oh, it's like it's language skills or it's maths, so it's the equivalent. And I'm thinking that language skills and literature and maths have evolved over thousands of years. They're the sort of foundations of our culture, and they're very central to how our brain works and how we connect with how we process knowledge and so on. And that's why they're so fundamental to primary and secondary education. If we think that coding is something similar and it has the equivalent effect to how we communicate and how we operate as a society, then definitely that's a good reason to invest in it and ask everybody to be literate in coding. But what I get the sense is that we're almost, it's the tail wagging the dog, that we're almost trying to chase up this this sort of drive to make everybody a coder. Not everybody has to be a hacker. And somebody yesterday, I don't remember who it is, said that maybe you don't want to be literate in coding or something else. Maybe you just want to kind of like, I don't know, be a farmer or something. Do you need to have hacking skills to do that? Maybe you do. I'm not saying you shouldn't. Maybe you should have the choice to do that, but maybe we should be a bit, cautious about having this. And I'm not saying you said that. I'm just saying generally of promoting this image that everybody has to be coding or hacking literate to survive in today's world, because that can be really disempowering. And also, yeah, so it's just about why we do that and what lies behind it, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Yeah, I think I suppose that the point that I was trying to make there, and that comes from that small piece of research, really small piece of research, and from the appetite for CoderDojo, is that it's just that the appetite is there, so that there's a genuine interest there for coding to be built into the curriculum. I don't think if it's built into the curriculum that it needs to be a fundamental cornerstone of learning. There are various ways and opportunities. You've seen how digital literacy is slowly being incorporated into the curriculum in short courses. So I think there are loads of opportunities for young people
to make choices about how they might want to have coding built in to the curriculum, or how it might meet their different needs at different points in time. And I think it should be optional, and as are many subjects in the curriculum. So it should be an option for people. But I do think there's an overlap between some of what happens, some of what we learn in coding and in mathematics, and I think there's definitely an overlap there, and that's something that could be just brought in even at a sort of a basic level through maths in the curriculum, understanding algorithms and how they work and what they mean for coding, as separate from someone who wants to go forth and really, you know, develop those hacking skills, as you call them. So I think there are different opportunities that will meet different needs in different contexts. But I suppose that the point I was trying to make is just that there seems to be an appetite there, and it's something that just appears to be. I mean, you've seen the momentum that's built around CoderDojo, so young people are interested. It's just to create a space where that's could be potentially more formalised for them if it's something that they want. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Next question. We have there a question.
This one here. Yeah. I also wanted to follow up on just said. There's a research project, an e-governance research project from Krems University in Austria. And they also dealt with media literacy and what it actually stands for. And they identified 8 different literacies that feed into the whole media literacy and what we mean by it. And there's a distinction between data literacy and coding literacy that they take. And data literacy, I think, is something that might be relevant to everybody that is using the internet. What happens to my data? How is what I do on the internet sent from A to B? Who can see it? And the second one, coding literacy, is more of how can I create the tools that other people can use to shape the internet or shape the content. I'm not sure that applies to everybody. I think it does not hurt to know that, but I certainly would not say that is a competency that we need to spread all over our generations, but how to use the content is, and there's a lot of different competencies that are involved, where I feel also that these are quite relevant and need to be mainstreamed in education. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, to comment on that, I agree with you. I think coding is something that's it's part of a suite of skills, but it's not necessarily directly aligned with the traditional suite of literacy skills and with digital literacy skills necessarily. But it's still part of the bigger picture, and it's in that sense it's something I just sort of wanted to flag here as there was a good example available.
Thank you. Next question.
If I may, just like to say, my digital divide has just been bridged because I had no clue what you were talking about with coding and coding dojos. But thank you, Martin, for this very clear explanation that coding is learning how to use the internet to help other people use the internet, if that's what I have now learned. So my digital divide is now bridged. I have 2 questions, if I may. The first is to ask if you don't mind being a little bit more generous with OECD. You said their results were very nuanced, but in my experience, OECD is anything but nuanced.
That's not quite what I said, but anyway.
Says, buy a lot of computers, put them in schools. Remember, schools is where you learn maths, then find that there is no effect on learning maths because the computers are there. My question is, in your presentation is focused on using digitalization or digital literacy to encourage active participation and engagement. This is something which we in the youth field want for our young people. Is OECD telling us if we rely on digitalized media and literacy in order to improve what we understand to be the real purpose of youth work, which is engagement and participation, it will have no effect? So please don't put any emphasis on digital literacy and digital media and so on in order to enhance participation. My auxiliary question is, can we tax YouTube? Can there be some method found to use moral pressure or corporate social responsibility to ensure that those institutions like YouTube and Google Alphabet, they generate enormous revenue from young people's contribution as producers of all of this media and entertainment that then other young people use. So we have this rather unjust situation where most of the most attractive things that are put on YouTube for young people are put there by other young people who get no reward for it. Of course, there are the Justin Biebers and so on who get a lot of money because they're discovered. But most of the production is from anonymous young people who put great things out there that entertain, distract, educate millions of other young people. And then Mrs. YouTube makes a lot of money out of it. How can we tap into their sense of corporate social responsibility to pull some of the resources out of that production machine and to put that money back into real social and political participation and engagement?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. Just in terms of the OECD report, my point I think was that I would need to look at the nuance of it in a bit more detail. But my impression of it is that what it's saying is that young people who use the internet frequently in school have lower results in maths. Actually, was the main variable they used. So I don't think there's necessarily causation there. So I don't think we can say that digital skills therefore result in lower levels of attainment in schools. I think it's a completely separate issue, actually. I think what you've got is a lot of ICT in schools. What they're saying is there's a lot of ICT in schools, but there's something missing between the capacity building bit around how ICT is used in schools. And I think that's really fundamentally the bridge actually there. So I think what it shows us, what we know is there is ICT and there's access to broadband in schools. What we know is teachers don't feel that equipped in how to use it, and they don't feel that confident actually in their skills in teaching young children and young people how to use it in schools. And what we know at the other end then is that there's a piece around where this technology is available. You know, simultaneously in those areas, we're seeing different and less positive outcomes. I don't think the two are necessarily related. I think there is obviously an important piece, and that's part of that pyramid too, past the access point, where we have the infrastructure and we have the access, where we need to build capacity within the schools for this type of training, and to have these teachers as intermediaries facilitating the learning process for students, and facilitating students, and we talked about blended learning and new e-learning opportunities, to facilitating students to avail of these in a more meaningful way. And I think there are positive examples actually from some of the Nordic countries in particular. I think Norway is a pretty good example of where the two are pretty well aligned. There's actually very good outcomes for children and young people, and at the same time very good uptake and use of ICT in schools. So I think there's the nuance is what's actually missing from that OECD headlines that we've been reading in the last few days. In terms of taxing YouTube, I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is that I agree with you that the industry is very exploitative, and I think it's particularly exploitative of young people in terms of the revenue it creates from their content, in terms of even think about how there's an assumed level of understanding of these really complex policies, and young people are just clicking OK. We know that they trade off, and as actually adults do too, that we're more likely, for the purposes of expedience, to just click OK, I'm happy with that privacy policy, that's fine, I don't have the time or energy to read it. And they make trade-offs for small gains, actually. So whether it's just to visit a website for 5 minutes, they're going to click OK to a cookie and a privacy policy. And I think that actually is an industry message, and it's something I think maybe we can raise awareness around it. We can go back to governments with it and put pressure on them to do something about it, because I think there's definitely a problem with this assumed level of understanding around young people and around policies and around them actually understanding what it is they're agreeing to in a digital world. And that's beyond digital literacy. That goes back to industry and back to governments and how they regulate. And it's I think there's an extra piece there, you're right. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. One more question here.
I have a question. If there is any data which is coping with the health of kids and young people and usage of digital things, and if there's any data, is it like, in the Turkey, what you showed that there is less risk and there's as well less usage. Is there any evidence which shows less usage or as late as possible that the kids are healthier, and in Norway kids are more healthy or less healthy? And is there anything like this which put these two things together? So the health, well-being of kids, and the time and the usage of the digital world. You know what I mean? Is it clear, the question, or not really?
Are you asking about well-being? Whether
the health, the real health, so the concentration capacities as well, really the health thing. So if there are any reported more or less, or any kind of comparison which we can do out of it.
I haven't got anything to draw on that for the minute. I'd have to look at it in more detail, but I suspect that to participate in a digital world, part of children and young people's well-being is to be able to participate in a meaningful way, and part of that is having access and skills. And I think the literature would probably support that too. But I don't have anything to draw on at the minute in relation to that.
Are there any other questions? Okay.
I have one question with regard to how digital literacy is learned. I think if we look at schools and schools use the same approaches as they used to use, then they will fail in providing sufficient digital literacy. That brings me to the question which role non-formal learning plays, or non-formal learning approaches play here in this regard, including also then the role of youth work and the competences of youth workers to provide these kind of knowledge or skills, or however we call it. So is there any evidence already, or studies, or I don't know what, that leads or provides us some information?
There are models and there are examples. The models of digital literacy sort of give us an indication. So a lot of how digital literacy is taught, and it's taught actually at third level in Ireland, and a lot of how it's taught is based on models around how to access information, so how to be able to how to access information, and how to know about the range of different resources and sources that are available. Then how to compare and evaluate information is sort of the next step. So to be able to access it, and I suppose the research is around children and young people's information behaviour in this sense. So it's called information-seeking behaviour, the theory around it, and it's. It focuses on access, evaluation, and then use of information, and being able to then, beyond that, the next level skills of being able to communicate it too. So that's the sort of suite of skills that are taught, and they're generally the skills that I've seen taught, and I've seen this as part of a curriculum, seem to be around information literacy actually. And the focus has been on being information literate, and that is that whole access, evaluating, communicating, and then applying that into a digital context. I think there's probably more that could be done, particularly around identity management, around making sure that young people understand the implications for their reputation of sharing information online, the implications of having an information trail and what it means to have an online identity. So there's pieces there that could be incorporated into it. I think those are the kind of fundamental pieces of it. So the building blocks are around, and there's frameworks. I think one of the European Commission frameworks, the DigiComp one, actually includes some of these steps too. They shape some of how digital literacy is taught in practice, but it tends to be information literacy applied in a digital sort of way. But as I said, I think there's this extra piece around identity management and personal information management that's important too.
Thank you. We only have time for one quick question. So out there in the back, we have a question. Last row. And then we'll close it up and we can hopefully discuss during the break.
Hi, Ray. I've been catched by more use, more risk, and I think that less use won't really be effective because children are really into a digital world before ABCDs nowadays, so we can't control their use of the digital world or the virtual world at that certain period. And I think that digital literacy isn't enough at that point. I mean, there should be a control in another level because nowadays data and information has become something very important and very expensive. There is an industry that is, created by using data, and big data is a hot topic nowadays. My question is that, for example, these children who get into the virtual world at a certain period, perhaps they want to know, they want to stop that. is there anything like, I mean, thinking about death in the virtual world? I mean, perhaps someone wants to die in the virtual world and be out of it, and is that something like be forgotten in the virtual world, or at least be in control of your data, know a history of it, and know who uses it and how it is used after that? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yes, I agree. I think there's probably a separate argument from digital literacy around internet freedom, and it's probably too big to explore here, and it's very contentious around that's regulating the internet and regulating the type of content people can access and the type of content that particularly young people can see online. I would pretty much support internet freedom once the skills were in place for people to navigate that in their own way. But I think your point about data and the data trail and the right to be forgotten is something that's been also of interest and of interest in policy debates over the last while. And I know some of the different media providers, Google in particular, have attempted to improve mechanisms to ensure that people can remove personal content from their indexed search databases if they wish to do so. The problem is that young people don't know how to do this, and the evidence shows that they're not savvy to necessarily be able to follow all these, to be able to utilize these mechanisms, but to follow the process and procedures needed. And despite research showing that they're actually interested in safeguarding their privacy, and they sort of understand, or they certainly perceive themselves to understand that reputation and identity management is important, that there's a disparity between that and the level of skills. And again, I think that's part of the industry message around supporting young people actually to be in a position to manage and control their own information. There are other theoretical arguments around applying property rights to information which get very technical, and none of them have ever really made it into law in a meaningful way. But I think those are interesting too. It's certainly a topic. It's certainly a topic that's been debated. But yeah, it's that piece again about the right to be forgotten, how we ensure that that's possible in an online world, how we advocate for it, how we make sure that that industry message gets across, but also that there's a policy imperative there. We know in Ireland a lot of the challenges because our Data Protection Commissioner is responsible for keeping an eye on a lot of the social media companies, because we have the headquarters outside of the US of a lot of the big tech companies. So we've Facebook, LinkedIn, Google, and our Data Protection Commissioner, at one stage had a really small office and really very little revenue. So that's been improved in the last few years, but there's certainly a lot of pressure sometimes on a very small number of people to make these things happen. I think that's something we could improve upon, and it's part of that is awareness raising and advocacy too.
Thank you. With this, we are going to close this session, and I'm going to invite you to maybe continue the discussion during the break with Nuala, because she will be here also. But for the rest of the day, it's obvious that digital literacy is a hot topic for us now. It obviously can have an impact and can have opportunities for participation, for political participation, for economic reasons as well. And we can chat a bit more about what you said about taxing YouTube, because there are ways of getting revenue from creating content, and young people are using vlogs, for instance, which are like video blogs, and they can get some revenue out of YouTube, a bit from an advertising point of view, but also from companies, so from the business sector as well. So it's a larger discussion here, but also how to tackle, what is the influence of digital literacy on the risks that it poses, and how we can tackle these again in the topics that we discussed, so on communication, on participation, on education, and on political participation. So I would invite you to go deeper now into these topics in the next parallel workshops, and actually come up with some key messages or key takeaways from all of these discussions yesterday and today, so that we can feed it into maybe a larger policy or initiative that can actually support what it is we're doing here using digital and digital means and new technologies and literacy. So thank you again. I will invite you to the break now, which is for half an hour, and then we are going to start the parallel labs. Just a minute, we are going to do like a flip chart drawing of all the rooms. There are going to be 4 parallel rooms for each of the topics in your program. So for communication, there will be 1 room, education, economic sphere, and democracy. So please check the flip chart outside so that you can know where to go.
And, yes. And those, just to remind you, those of you who are interested to record the message, to contribute to the Solidarity movie, room B in 5 minutes.